The chair beside Renata's bed was the kind that didn't adjust, plastic slightly tilted, designed by someone who believed discomfort kept visitors from staying too long. I had been sitting it for 40 minutes before my mother noticed I'd arrived. "Oh," she said, not warmly. Just "oh," the way you'd acknowledge a draft from an open window. My father was already in conversation with the attending nurse, asking questions I recognized as slightly wrong, confident mispronunciations, the vocabulary of someone who'd watched too many medical dramas. He didn't look up. Renata watched me from the bed. She had tubes at her wrist and a quality of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. She was 34. She looked older tonight. We both did, probably. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know." That was the whole exchange. We had learned over the years to say very little and mean much more than we said, or to say very little and mean nothing at all. I was never certain which applied to us. My mother had turned back to her phone. Earlier in the hallway I had heard her explaining me to someone, a cousin maybe, or a neighbor. "She's been figuring things out, you know how she is, always taking the long way around everything. Long way, as if 11 years was a detour, as if the choices I made were scenic routes, chosen out of indecision rather than direction. I didn't correct her. I never corrected her. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from explaining yourself too many times to people who have already decided. I had reached that exhaustion somewhere around my 30th birthday and made a quiet peace with it, let them narrate. I had other things to do. The ID badge was in my coat pocket, face down. I'd been paged on the way in, had clipped it on and then taken it off again outside the room without entirely knowing why. Force of habit, maybe. Or something else. A preference for entering as a daughter rather than arriving as an authority. Renata's monitor beeped twice, irregularly. I sat forward without thinking, reading it the way you read a clock, automatically, and then sat back. Normal. Nothing concerning. But my father saw the movement and misread it as anxiety. "She's fine," he said, with the particular patience men use when reassuring someone they consider easily frightened. The doctor explained everything. "I know," I said again. He looked at me for a moment, trying to determine whether I was being agreeable or difficult. He often couldn't tell. That used to bother me. It didn't anymore. The room had the flat light that hospital rooms always have, neither day nor night, just a kind of suspended brightness that made everyone look slightly unwell. My mother had brought flowers that were slightly too large for the small table. A get-well balloon sagged against the window, already losing its commitment to the ceiling. I was looking at the balloon when the night nurse came in. She was moving at the particular efficient pace of someone halfway through a long shift, checking the chart on her tablet before she'd fully entered the room. Then she looked up. She stopped walking, not dramatically. Not a full stop, or a slight hesitation. One of those pauses that happens when the brain catches something the body hasn't processed yet. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't realize." She looked at me directly. "Dr. Vasquez, I didn't know you had family on this floor." The room changed temperature, not loudly. Rooms don't shift loudly. But there is a specific quality to silence when it falls over people who are in the middle of assuming something and suddenly cannot. "My sister," I said. The nurse nodded, professional and kind, and continued to the chart. She asked me 2 clinical questions, briefly, because it was natural to, not performing anything, just talking to someone she knew as a colleague, as someone whose judgment she trusted, whose department she'd sent patients to, I answered. She noted something, adjusted the IV drip a half degree, said she'd check again in an hour, and left. My father had not finished whatever sentence he'd started. My mother's phone was still in her hand, but she was no longer looking at it. Renata was looking at the ceiling. Her jaw was doing something careful and controlled, the way jaws do when they're managing an emotion the face isn't ready to show. I didn't say anything. There was nothing I wanted to say. I wasn't interested in the moment the way they might have expected me to be. I felt no sharpness, no vindication rising in my chest like something owed. What I felt was closer to tired, and beneath the tired, something that might have been grief for all the versions of this conversation we could have had and didn't. My father sat down. Outside, somewhere down the corridor, a cart moved past. Someone laughed, distantly. The building went on being a building, full of its ordinary urgencies, its long nights, its small mercies. "Your drip needs to come up about 2 inches," I told Renata quietly. "So gravity works properly." She looked at me. Her eyes were doing something I didn't have a name for. "Okay," she said. I reached over and adjusted it. Small correction, the kind you make when you know what you're looking at, when you've spent years learning to see what other people miss. Then I sat back in the uncomfortable chair and stayed. Not because I needed them to understand, because she was my sister, and someone who knew what they were doing should be in the room.